Hello, WalkStars. I am so excited for this upcoming episode. It's with Katrina Rodabaugh, who has written one of the most important books in my life, and it's called Mending Matters. I found Katrina after I had decided that I was going to take a class every quarter throughout the year. And my class, the first part of this year, was her class about how to mend things, how to mend dresses, sweaters, quilts. And so we had I believe it was a 7-week class where she taught all sorts of techniques for mending things to make things more usable, more beautiful. And I fell in love with how she moved through the world. And as it turns out, she's also one of us, a walk star. So, walk stars, please enjoy this upcoming episode with Katrina Rodabaugh, one of my favorites. If you would like to learn more about Katrina, you can find her at katrinarodabaugh.com. And that's spelled KatrinaRodabaugh.com.
Blind Nil Audio.
I'm Alex L.
I'm Libby Delana. Welcome
to This Morning Walk podcast.
Oh my gosh, this is a dream come true. I can't believe I'm looking at you right now.
I feel the same way.
This is absolutely magical. So, walk stars, Katrina is my teacher. She's my mending teacher. And I just took her class at the beginning of the year and, dare I say, fell in love with Katrina. So I just reached out on Instagram and said, hey, will you come talk to us? Because I know you're a walk star. You're a walker.
Yeah. It's been so nice connecting with you. Really, I just feel like it's always so nice to connect to other folks who appreciate the power of the walk, but also that as a metaphor for ongoing practice of any sort.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit of background, but please, chime in. Okay. So you're an author, you're a poet, you're an exquisite teacher. You are an artist, I would say, focused on the sort of intersection of sustainability, craft, design, all things magical. You are an advocate for visible mending, which I think is, we're going to talk more about that, but is such a beautiful practice. We're going to talk about a quilt that you just mended. I also love how, I think I have this right, you say you have mended jeans, sweaters, dresses, quilts. You've also mended outdated views of motherhood.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big one.
Same. Oh my gosh, we're going to get to walking. But say more about that. Did I leave anything out, by the way?
No, you did a beautiful job. That's a wonderful synopsis. Thank you. I was like, ooh, I need to write this down. And when people ask me, I just need to say this.
Oh my gosh. Well, you're also just, one of my girl crushes. So I'll chalk it up to that too. So tell us.
Look at that. Look at that. We get to have this shared admiration. How wonderful. There's still magic in social media, right?
There is.
These are these moments when I'm like, oh, you can still connect with these kindred spirits, and you can still connect with these people who feel like collaborators and colleagues.
Yes. So tell us about mending the outdated view of motherhood.
Oh gosh, that's a big place to start.
Yes.
Okay. I think, I really started physically mending when I became a mom. I had worked in the arts and as an artist and a writer for a long time. And the practice of mending was something that I could do while tending to a young child because it can be interrupted, because its tools are portable, because it's sort of like you can do it in these little spurts and still gain that satisfaction of having done something creative and productive. But I think you can't really understand how outdated the views of motherhood are until you are a new mother, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That was just huge. And still, my kids are now 12 and 9, and still sometimes it's these subtleties around who I should be or how I should mother or how I should spend my time. and they're subtle. And I think honestly, a lot of the times people comment in a way that's intended to be
Mm-hmm.
encouraging or supportive, right? But it feels outdated, I guess, mostly when they're not recognizing that I am living these dual lives of
Yes.
running my own business and mothering. And they also oversect all the time. There's so many intersections. It's so messy. That's where the magic is, I think. The mess is the magic, right? But just, I feel like I'm constantly having to remind people, yes, I love to style beautiful photographs, and the rest of my house is a wreck. I have two little kids, right? Like,
Right.
just like kind of always trying to break that down a little bit, but mostly for the new mothers, like mostly
Mm,
for or parents who have young ones like under 5. I call those the emergency parenting years, where it's
yes.
like you turn your back and there could be an emergency. Yeah, it's just, it takes all of us. It takes all of us, all genders, all lifestyles of folks parenting these kids, I think, to really come up with a new ideal, or even just a new opportunity in caretaking.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And even just acknowledging that beauty is in the mess of it, right? And some of the inconsistency and the wabi sabi, which takes me back to your visible mending. I mean, I will say in your class, one of the things that you do so beautifully is really just encourage people to start, to practice,
Mm.
to dive in. I don't know what perfection is. And you made that sort of starting moment when things are messy and not very straight and not so necessarily beautiful, which is, and I think
Mm.
that's what I hear you saying about sort of the outdated views of motherhood, which is there's a lot of mess and chaos and uncertainty, and yet there's still a lot of beauty in that. And so I see those two as being really parallel. So you've published 3 books, Mending Matters, Make Thrift Mend, and let's see the last one. Oh, The Paper Playhouse. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about each of those books. My recollection is that was it Mending Matters came out of a response to um, really aligning your wardrobe with your values. I feel like that was such a powerful message. Tell us, am I accurate? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Mending Matters was published in 2018. Is that right? I'm getting the dates wrong. Yes. And I started what I call my Make Thrift Mend project
Yes.
in 2013. And so I started it in August 1st, 2013, in response to the Rana Plaza factory collapse
Oh.
in Dhaka, Bangladesh, which was in April. So about 4 months later, I started this project. And I was an environmental studies major in college. And then I left college and went straight to the arts. And I worked in galleries and theaters and mostly nonprofit art spaces for 12 years. And I always felt like I was sort of straddling those two worlds between like sustainability and creativity. But the sustainability became sort of like my lifestyle, like this sort of personal choice around, trying the foods I would eat and, my house, things like that. Never to the place of perfectionism. My husband and I were both nonprofit workers. So there was never a huge, budget to work with, but just thinking about that. But it wasn't until the factory collapse happened that I realized I had sort of left out fashion in thinking about sustainability. I'd thought about food. I had even, in being pregnant, being a mother, thought about the materials I was bringing into the house for my child. But I hadn't really thought about fashion. I shopped at the thrift stores because I liked finding that sort of unique garment, right, or the challenge of that. I shopped secondhand because I was, a nonprofit administrator and didn't have a big budget. And when I started to connect that these were also sustainable choices, I thought, okay, this is a place to really go deeper. And at the time, I was living in Oakland and I had been working in the San Francisco art scene. There was a lot of talk around creative practice, but also around like this sort of like personal agency as an artist and social practice. And like, what does it mean to kind of live out your project, right? As opposed to like putting it in the gallery. And so I decided that for a year, I wouldn't buy any new clothing. I put myself on a fashion fast, and that for a year, I wouldn't buy any new clothing. And I had a blog at the time, and I put it on the blog because I knew that then I'd be held accountable, right? To make sure I wasn't buying new clothing, and to do it for a year because that felt hard. And instead, I focused on making simple garments, which was something I had done in college and kind of fallen out of practice with. And then to really focus on secondhand, not just sort of like as an afterthought, but to focus on that and then to mend what I own. And so through that, I taught myself mending, and I fell in love with visible mending, and I started using plant dyes. And, I think it's like you can start anywhere and then you kind of like fall deeper and deeper into it. And so then I realized that if I was buying biodegradable fibers, plant fibers, animal fibers, linens, cottons, silks, wools, those could be dyed with plants. And then I could be on the walks through my neighborhood and I could pluck the oxalis out of the sidewalk, or I could clip the wild fennel from the park, right? And so then it was also became this way of like deepening my relationship to the environment. And at the time we were living in a very small, very urban environment. And then when I moved here to upstate New York 9 years ago, one of the first things that struck me was I didn't know the plants. I knew the plants from my childhood, but I didn't know them in that moment of my life. And so that became this opportunity to really like engage with the land, right? To understand the plants for their purposes in dying. And then, of course, that just spirals out too, because then you're appreciating them for all sorts of other purposes as well.
Okay, so you just mentioned going for a walk, and that was a place where
Yeah, good.
Okay, so tell us about well, I think the thing that I've learned in talking to so many people is that walks can be so many different things. And what I just heard you say was it was a tool for your creativity. It was a place for you to find materials. I mean, we certainly hear about it being a mental health, cure-all in many ways. It is a creative space. It is a spiritual place, a mental health space. But what I've heard for you was sort of an innovative space. It was a place where you found materials. It was a place where you became inspired and found potentially new materials to further your craft. Is that fair? Tell us about what a walk
Absolutely.
means in your craft.
Oh, goodness. I mean, I think there's just so much about walking that is beneficial. But again, I had young children and I wanted to get them in the woods. And so we'd go on these hikes up in the hills, up in the Oakland Hills when we lived there. We moved here and we'd take these hikes through the woods. And I was always trying to identify the plants, in the fields and the woods. And then when we moved here, I had an acre of land that I could garden and plant on for the first time ever, since my own childhood. And so then it was like, what plants did I want to bring on the land and why? But the thing about the walks still that I love when you live in cold climates like ours and you walk through all the seasons, right? Again, you're out in the seasons. You're not observing them, you're experiencing them, right? When it's raining on you, it's snowing on you, it's a different experience. But the thing that I started noticing, because I tend to take the same walk at this point, that happened in the pandemic. I used to walk all over, and now my morning walk is like 1 mile up the road and 1 mile back, right? I pass the same plants. And so I watch those plants in all seasons. I have my favorite forsythia, right? I have my favorite iris. You watch them come, you watch them bloom, you watch them go away. And then I started locating dye plants along the walk. So then there was a field of goldenrod, and then there was, the Queen Anne's lace. And so you start sort of recognizing them in time with your walking. And that just enriches your experience of the seasons because you are in it. Everybody knows, who walks has like been caught in the hail or like caught in the blizzard. You thought you had long enough and you didn't, right? But it ends up really deepening that experience.
Yeah, I that's so beautifully said. And I think what it makes me fall in love with the place. When I do that same walk over and over, it is a love affair. It is really, really tending to that space. I would also say for me, see if this resonates for you. I walk the same route often. I go past this one barn that I truly have fallen in love with, and I've come to really respect her place in the ecosystem of our community and what she offers. And I also think that barn taught me how to see, not just look. Because as we walk and we can eat, we are going at a pace that enables us to take in I think at a rhythm that is more human versus in a car or on a bike. So we go past these beautiful plants or this beautiful barn and we see them, we feel them, we understand their meaning in the ecosystem. And I think that only comes with a walk. That's a regular walk past these same plants. And you love them. They are meaningful and important on that path.
Oh gosh. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that like that human scale is something I've been
Yeah.
thinking about a lot
Yeah.
lately, mostly in response to my time on social media and the amount of information I'm taking in, right?
Mm.
I heard this sort of phrasing around like our brain's capacity for human interaction, and at what point have we surpassed that, right?
Oh, interesting.
Because
Yeah.
it's so new
Mm-hmm.
in terms of our evolution, right? That and so I've been thinking about that human scale, like what does that mean and how is that different for different folks? Our houses are different sizes, our towns are different sizes, our bodies are different sizes, but there's still this understanding of like a human scale, right?
Yeah.
Because there's not actually that much variety
Right.
when you
Right.
think of the world, right? When you think of
Yes.
like the size of the world. And so that is really, I love the way that you put that, that like the pacing of it, the speed of it is adapted. Our bodies have adapted to that speed. That's how fast we can walk, right? And even if we run, which I'm not a very fast runner, it's not that much faster.
Right.
Like riding in a car
Right.
is like exponentially faster. Yeah, that's really beautiful. You do have to really like notice each, you can notice each plant as it's passing by. I think the other thing for me, because I do have the same walk now, I can watch like my favorite forsythia and, you know, you watch like the house under renovation and you watch it finish, right? And all that. But there's also something magical to walking in a new place, right?
Mm.
And we just took this walk in the Catskills over the weekend. And the spring ephemerals, like the spring flowers that are only there right now when it's warm enough that the sunlight hits them and they bloom, but it's not warm enough that the canopy of leaves has come in over top, right? Exquisite flowers. And I can only identify like 10 of them. And that's very small. But when I find them in these new locations, it's just a delight, right? It's like a surprise party. So then that I
That's
think
so
is also
beautiful.
interesting. It's like traveling or something, right? You are seeing it for the first time because you're not used to how you usually see it.
Right.
And so I think both. I love that kind of meditation of my regular walk, the familiarity of it,
Mhm.
but then of course that kind of magic to walking someplace new.
And you just took a really magical walk in Joshua Tree.
Oh wow, that was
Talk about
incredible.
new. Isn't that it's so different from your walk this past weekend with those little tender
Yeah,
woodland
yeah.
ephemerals contrasted with Joshua Tree. Tell us about that walk. I mean, what did you? Again, it's a new walk, so you're meeting new inhabitants, right? New creatures, new plant, new flora, new fauna, and your
Yeah.
reaction to those as we walk through just shifts. What did you find in that process on that
It was
walk?
mesmerizing.
Right.
It was just mesmerizing. We went out to the Mojave Desert for my kids' spring break, and my husband and I had driven through that area like about 20 years ago
Mm.
on a cross country road trip. And so I remembered the landscape, you know, sort of in that like fuzzy part of memory
Yes.
before children.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Everything is a different color or something. Um, but being in it, and again, like, you know, we're there in late March, like the flowers were blooming, the cactus were blooming, it's mild weather. But I think I was reading something about the desert plants and they use the word scant, that it's a
Mm.
scant,
Mm.
like as a descriptive term
Mhm.
versus a lush landscape,
Mhm.
right? And the East Coast is this lush landscape and the scant landscape. And again, the ways of seeing, like how you see that differently when there isn't a bunch of foliage, right? When you see you see the yucca and there's, you know, rocks and sand around it, and how that's so different than here when I watch the daffodil come up through the grass, right? Or something like
Right.
that. Yeah, just really stunning. And again, though, there's this moment for me where I feel this like disoriented
Mm.
because I don't know the plants. Like my brain immediately
Mm.
wants to start identifying them. And once I even have a handful, then I can feel like more present there. It's I don't know, it's this very kind of strange relationship. It's like I have to know them a little bit. Like who are these people? Who are these people in this room?
Yes. Well, I
And
think.
then once I know a few of them, I can settle in.
Well, it's not. If you've read "Braiding Sweetgrass" by Robin Wall,
Yes.
she talks about that, which is to walk through a new ecosystem and not know the names of the plants is in fact like walking into a house where you don't know anybody's name, and that it is in a way, it is our requirement when going into a new ecosystem to know who's going to be at the party, to know who it is,
Oh, yes.
and that acknowledgement is, maybe this is too far out there, but it is an act of love, which is to acknowledge and to note I feel that way in every new ecosystem. Like, wow, I didn't study geology enough. I don't know the bird songs. I don't know enough about it. So I love the way you just sort of articulated that by knowing a few of them, you definitely feel more grounded in a space, which is that really resonates. Yeah, I think that's really,
Absolutely.
really beautiful. Here's a question for you, because I think you shared a little bit of this on your social media. So one of the questions we love to ask is, what are you walking with or through right now? What are the things
Oof.
as you walk that come up, that bubble up, that are hard, that are joyous? But as you walk, what are the things that seem to be returning to your walk, to either resolve, to look at, to explore? What are you walking with or through?
Gosh, that's such a beautiful question. Well, it's spring here, and it's like intoxicatingly spring, right?
Right,
It's dizzying
right.
at the speed at which like things are flowering right now. And so I remember every year around April
Yeah.
that I am an inspired human
Yeah.
because January, February, and March, it is a lot of work for me to stay
Yes.
inspired,
Yes.
right? It's like I
Yeah.
have to really work at that. And then April comes, April and May, it just floods me. It's like I can garden, I'm watching all the plants bloom, I'm thinking about dye plants. It's like I just toss the windows open, all the projects flood in. And so I think that's kind of what I've been thinking about in my walks is it's energy. I'm more
Yeah.
energized now.
Yeah.
And that I didn't do anything, right? Like I just kept showing up, taking the walks, writing in the journal, teaching the classes. But there's something about this time of year that our bodies or my body just responds to with possibility and opportunity, right? This is when we start planting the garden. This is when we're going to really have all this local harvest for the next, 6 months. So I've been thinking about that, and also my children are 9 and 12. My littlest just turned 9.
Yeah.
We've just entered this moment of them truly being more independent
Yes.
for a longer stretch of time. My 12-year-old, yes, but now I have a 9-year-old and he can play for an hour, right? Or he can like
Yes.
do something, he can get himself a snack. And this is also this, it's bewildering a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, wow, there's this new opportunity and this next decade of parenting before they're likely gone away, right? And like, what is that? And that feels so rich. And it feels like I can share so much more of my own like value system and my own mental health care tools and things with them in this next
Mm-hmm.
decade.
Mm-hmm.
Conversations with my 12-year-old are so rich. Like
Mm.
he's really absorbing social roles right now,
Mm.
right? And the things that he comments on people, it's just really true, both good and bad, right? Like, so that's really rich, but he's understanding some of that subtlety. So I'm thinking about that on my walk too, like, oh, they're getting a little bigger and that allows some opportunity for me. But there's also a little bit of mourning in that,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think, yeah, just mostly this like moment of inspiration. It feels really big.
Mm-hmm. I imagine
Yeah.
also that it might have that sort of growth of watching your children age and become sort of more independent. How does that affect your work? How does that affect your craft, your business, your desire to plant new projects? How is that impacted?
Yeah, that feels just full of possibility.
Yes.
I wrote all 3 books with young children.
Mm.
Um, and so I was just working in micro sessions all the
Yeah.
time, micro sessions.
Yeah.
And we never had family that was in town. We never had enough childcare. My husband and I are both self employed. It was always just like this juggle,
Right.
right? You have an
Right.
hour here, you have 3 hours. It's like the half day preschool. Um, so I got really good at like being efficient with my to-do list. So what are the 3 things I want to do today? And that's it, right? Or like I'm on book deadline. I have to get this done. And so there's a lot of movement around that. And you just have to do this one thing or
Right.
these 3 things. But now that there's a little bit more time, at first I found that almost uncomfortable. Like I was like, oh, now they're both, once the pandemic, they went back to school full time. I was like, I have 6 hours every day. I mean, that's kind of amazing,
Right. Right.
right?
It's like when they first start taking naps, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a
Yeah,
whole hour.
totally. Yeah. So now that I have this like mostly reliable, more reliable schedule, at first I found it unnerving.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do with this
Right.
time? Or am I
Yeah.
being productive enough? Right. Or just like all those little notions that we're kind of trapped in capitalism, right? Like, am I being productive enough? Is this really what I want to do? But now that I've settled into it a little bit more, I'm like, oh, I get to take my love of slow design
Yes.
and all these really time intensive handcrafts and like let them like open up a
Yeah.
little bit, right? Let them kind of unfurl
Mm-hmm.
and see what's there. And that feels delicious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I would say we're having this conversation the day after Earth Day, which I think we could all say every day should be Earth Day. Needless to say, here
Yes.
we are. I would
Yes.
say that you're an environmentalist, that your craft is an expression of many social issues, environmental issues. Can you say more about that? Does that resonate for you? I mean, I feel as if we need everybody to take what it is that is meaningful to them and do as you did, which is align your values with how you're really living and your expression of your creativity. And so, does that feel right to you? That to be called an environmentalist with sort of a real focus on societal issues, does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's always so hard to like find the right words,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I feel like my work is kind of this intersection between sustainability and writing and handcraft.
Yeah.
And then I try to get more specific,
Hmm.
but it's almost like I get more specific and then I resist it,
Hmm.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, don't we
Yeah.
all do that? Like
Yes. Yeah.
we agree and we resist. But I think the relationship to the environment, to my environment, the relationship to how can I just care for this place a little bit deeper, not even better, right? But just
Yeah.
how can I care for this a little bit
Mhm.
deeper? Um, and for me, my love of the woods and my love of plants and the natural world, it came as a teenager.
Mhm.
And then in college, I would sort of, solo
Mhm.
out on these hikes by myself. And that felt really empowering as a young woman to
Mhm.
just like, take these
Mhm.
hikes and things. But then I think like through the Make Thrift Men project, really, I've learned so much about that there really is no one way, right? Like there's like I always say there's 117 ways
Yeah.
to be an environmentalist,
Right.
and you just have to decide which one is most important to you and
That's
which one is
beautiful.
possible for
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
And then again, it's like once you start with okay, so I didn't buy new clothing for a year. And then I switched to mostly biodegradables because I wanted to be able to use the plant dyes, the fibers that could, but then you're whittling out synthetics, right?
Right.
But then I moved to a cold environment and I bought a big synthetic jacket,
Yes.
down-filled jacket,
Yes.
because I
Yeah.
was freezing,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So then you realize, okay, wait, there are exceptions there. Or I tried to focus mostly on secondhand, and that's great, wonderful. But then I would have people in classes who would say, well, I don't live in an area where I can access secondhand, or secondhand clothes don't fit my body,
Yes.
right? Or
Yes.
um, people who have sensitivities around fibers, textures, all of that. So you say, okay, it's like you just can't come up with that one rule. But then through that, you realize if 117 people are all engaging in the way that they feel the most passionate about,
Right.
that's
Wonderful.
just so much more powerful.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, you see that, like, again, in parenting, like I watch my children who have the same parents, the same environment, completely different interests, different bodies, right? Like all of this. And you realize that's like built into us.
Right.
Like that diversity of personhood is built into
Mm.
community
Mhm.
so that we didn't all have the same strengths and weaknesses. What a wreck that would be,
But
right?
yeah.
And so I think when I realized, oh, wait a minute, it's just mending. Like that felt so meaningless in a way. Like who cares if you just mend one pair of pants, right? But actually, if you mend that one pair of pants, like what are all the lessons that come out of that pair of
Right.
pants? And then when I started teaching people to mend pants, and then when I started publishing about mending pants, then you realize like tens of thousands of people
Yes.
can mend their things.
Mm.
And that's where the impact comes. But if I had shied away from that impulse of let me mend my pants, then I wouldn't have been able to share that,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So I think that's also the constant, like
Yeah.
as a creative and with the morning walk, like it's that constant battle in my own brain, right?
Yes.
Of like trusting the instinct, trusting like the spirituality of it, the embodiment of it, but also the intellect of it,
That's exactly
and
right.
and moving with that force, even if it's quote just mending.
Mhm.
right? Because so many of the most beautiful
Mm.
things somebody could have cast off as being just irrelevant.
Right.
Gardening, like all the flowers that I grow now, when I first started gardening, I was like, no, we'll grow fruits and vegetables. It's like really practical way to, to use this garden. Well, that's fine. And yes, we still grow fruits and vegetables. But what I love are the flowers. What I love are the dye plants. Right. And so now it's to the point where like my husband does most of the vegetables and he loves it. And I'm like, that's great. Let's look at this flower. Look at this color. Right. So, but yeah, I do think of the term environmentalist, and that's fraught, right?
It
Because I'm
is,
not a
of course,
scientist.
right?
And I don't have that kind of background. But at the same time, the more people who are willing to identify as environmentalists or artists or writers or walkers,
Hmm.
right, the
Yeah,
better.
yeah. No, that's so beautiful. I think the dear friend Tina Roth Eisenberg, known as Swiss Miss on all the socials, who talks about the power of enthusiasm. So
Mm,
when you say, I'm just teaching mending, well, mending does matter, not and that if we have 117 people who are bringing enthusiasm to that activity, you can't help but feel the passion of someone's enthusiasm. It is contagious, it is bright, it is attractive. I Anybody who is enthusiastic about something I find really interesting. So to your point,
mm,
you may bring to the table a certain way of thinking about mending. The next person that you teach is going to do it uniquely and separately and enthusiastically. And that's what we want to do, is kick over this domino of enthusiasm, whether it's for walking or mending, and all those things collectively create a really dynamic and empowered community that has meaning, that has impact, it's an important component of how we go through our lives. So I love that concept, which is basically what we do individually, we can very easily dismiss as not important, but it is in the act of community and sharing and collected, where we all bring our enthusiasm, that it now has this beautiful impact on the world. So I will say,
absolutely.
taking your class, quite honestly, I had this wonderful old favorite sweater, and now I have these 5 big red, beautifully woven, thanks to you. Well, maybe they're not beautiful. Well, the teacher taught very well. The student has yet to make them exactly the way I want, but it is such it's a different object now. It has attention built into it. It has care and affection and love. It is not just a functional object. So I am grateful to you for sharing what it is that you're enthusiastic about. And I do think it brings to all of us just you call it slow fashion or slow craft, a real attention and mindfulness to what it is that we have in front of us and are consuming. I feel that way about walking. I um, am so enthusiastic about it. I'll talk to anybody about it, as we can see here.
That's
So
great.
yeah. So tell me, what are you reading right now? What is on your bedside table? What is a book that you're enthusiastic about, that you can share with our walk stars, that might be inspiring to them?
Yeah. Oh, there's always so many books.
I
I
know.
always freeze, like, which book? Which book? Um, I actually have a copy of Braiding Sweetgrass here on my desk. And that is such an incredible book and such a
Incredible.
powerful book that I've come back to
Yeah.
so many times. Um, I kind of have like, I have a few different book areas. Like, I have my nonfiction books, I have my fiction books, I have my poetry books, my craft books, and they're actually in different
Parts of,
bookshelves, like
yeah.
around the
Yeah.
house. Yeah. So I feel like I'm always kind of going between like 4 or 5 of them. I've been thinking a lot about how to transfer what I learned with Make Thrift Mend and sustainable fashion into sustainable interiors, home interiors.
Mm.
Mostly because I live in a very old farmhouse and we've been fixing it up for 9 years. And my husband has a background in theater design, but in the pandemic, theater went dark and he sort of shifted into project management for home construction,
Mm-hmm.
commercial also. So he's been thinking a lot about sustainability from that kind of framework. And then I've been thinking about it from the sort of personal use. How can you apply it? What can you mend in your home? What can you thrift for your
Mm.
home? What can you make for your home? So I have a big stack of interior design books from the library, and I'm like struggling to bring up one name in this moment. That's one pile that I've really been poring over. Um, and then I think like that intersection between, for me as a writer, I love that intersection between like, yes, there's Braiding Sweetgrass, by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And then right underneath it, I have Annie Alber's On Weaving book,
Yes.
right, which is
Yes.
just this incredible book about weaving. And underneath that is this sculpture of Ruth Asawa, like just as I'm sitting here on my studio table. And so for me, one of the most wonderful things is how can I take a poet or a novelist or a writer like Kimmerer, right? And then like the weaver, like Annie
Mm,
Albers. And how can I think about that? How can I bring that into my home? How can I bring that into
beautiful.
my studio?
Hmm.
But how can I also bring that into my home? Like
Hmm.
these are all opportunities for creativity,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And these are all opportunities for design
Right.
too.
That's right.
And so I think it's really easy to sort of say, well, I'm not a trained designer. Well, I'm not a scientist, so I can't be an environmentalist. Well, I'm not a trained designer, so I can't be an interior decorator. But you realize that's just not
It's
true
not
because
true.
we're all,
Hmm.
no, we're all furnishing our homes and we're all putting on clothing to walk outside. And, we're all appreciating certain plants. So books are just really a big part of creativity for me. But I love that place where my brain starts to like swirl them together.
Oh, I love that. And I love when a stack of books becomes a playground for new thinking or problem solving, right? Which is the three books you just, in fact, I think you shared the Ruth Asawa and the Weaving book in our
Yeah.
class. And
Yeah.
right. So when you take those two artists and their passion, their enthusiasm, their perspective on the world, and you just even have them on the corner of your desk, it's amazing what ideas can come forth from that. Just that those intersection of those three spines of those books. I think there's so much problem solving in having beautiful books stacked around. Um,
Oh,
Oh,
absolutely.
it's so powerful. And I love that you're thinking of interiors. I just went through a renovation of a house and it's a challenge to do it sustainably. It's really it's an opportunity to really think about what we bring into our house, what matters, what has meaning. It's a really it's an interesting place to pause. I will say that I love that you're thinking about it. I can't wait for your next book. Please write about that.
Whew, that one might be a few years off, but
Okay.
yeah, but that's the part that fascinates me. What you
Yes.
said that when the challenge, when you can pause in the challenge,
Yes.
right? Like that's the part to me that is just thrilling.
Yes.
When we just renovated our kitchen, we've been here for 9 years. We renovated it last summer, and I had almost panic. I
Yeah.
almost felt panic around the decisions because I wanted, and that's when I know, like, hold on, am I just trying to get this right? Because that's not helpful.
No.
Or
Right.
is this an opportunity for me to learn? Is this an opportunity for me to go deeper?
Yeah.
And I put up on Instagram, I was like, what do I do with my cabinets? Like they're still
Yes.
usable, but they don't fit the wall. We're getting rid of them. And of course it was like through that community that people were like, you can donate them to,
Mhm.
like certain spaces that are looking for salvaged
Mhm.
home materials.
Mhm.
Sure enough, they came and took them. They came and
Yes.
picked them up
Yes.
from my house.
Yes.
Like, and so that sharing of resources, like sometimes if I don't share the challenge, or I don't share the panic or the question, I don't get this
Mm.
amazing flood of
Mhm.
suggestions and ideas. And I've learned so much about mending through teaching
Yeah.
mending, like
Yes.
through
Yeah.
my mending
Mhm.
classes. My favorite knot, the tailor's knot, like a student taught me that,
Yes.
right? Like, and so you learn so much through that sharing. And I think we can all get to that moment of shutdown. We're afraid of criticism or rejection or whatever it is. But when you kind of move through that
Yes.
and you realize so much of this work, particularly with something like like mending, these stitches were handed down,
Yes.
right? Like a recipe.
Mhm.
They're handed down from grandmother to mother to child. And, or sometimes, from grandfather. Like many grandfathers were darning also, which I'm
Mm.
like fascinated by.
Mhm. Mhm.
But so they're handed down, and so yes, you can study it, and there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. But I'm just like, well, does that not work? Like,
Right.
does it hold up?
Yes.
Because if it holds up, it's the right way to do it, right?
Mhm.
And there's tips and tricks I can teach around that. But I find like when I'm able to just be in that space of vulnerability of like, this isn't working, this feels really hard, I feel kind of panicked about this, that's when I know there's this swell of opportunity to follow. And that's what redesigning our kitchen did. So you have to make all of these choices, but I'm always thinking about what we discard. It's
Mm.
it's almost
Mhm.
like I feel like in environmentalism, people all kind of have their passion. And
Yes.
for me, it's the land.
Yes.
For some people, it's the water, it's the air. For me, it's the land, and that's probably my connection to plants. So I'm always thinking about compost and about landfill and about what we discard. Where are there systems in place to discard that thoughtfully? Where are there not? Which communities have access to that system in place and which don't? How is it different living in a small urban environment in California where we have curbside composting, right?
Yeah.
Curbside recycling versus living in a rural landscape where we have, private garbage pickup. But we have the space to compost, right? So there's always that kind of like back and forth.
Yeah.
So applying that to interior has been fascinating to me because, like most things, oftentimes people are taught or encouraged to design with new materials.
Yes. Right.
And
right.
that's just how you're taught,
Right. Yeah.
But what happens when you have to redesign? What happens when you have to design with materials that are already in existence, or even just half the materials you already own?
Right.
What does that look like? And all of our ancestors did that so beautifully.
Right.
They took the curtain and made the tablecloth. They took the tablecloth and made, the apron. They took the apron and made the napkin. And I just love that kind of like hierarchy, right, of materials, thinking about that. And living in the Northeast where we have all these access to antique furnitures and things like that too.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I think we've gotten to a place where we think innovation means new or new materials or versus reuse or new combination of things. I want to back up for just a second, which is you talked about the sort of beauty of finding the calm in the chaos, right? It's in that moment that there is often quite a bit of learning or understanding or possibility, opportunity. I have to say, for me, I find that in the walk. The calm and the chaos is when I start feeling the equivalent of the overwhelm. It's like, oh, time to go for a walk, and it's that the walk holds this space, this quiet, this fresh breeze, or a beautiful view of an ephemeral. That those walks in general are a place where even when there's a lot of chaos, there's quite a bit of calm, and therefore there's a lot of renewal, there's a lot of creativity, there's, because of that space and that sort of calm in the chaos, there's a lot of opportunity. And I don't know if that resonates. The walk for me becomes a place where I feel very held, even in the midst of chaos.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, well, you create the space too,
That's
right?
right.
You're active in that.
That's right.
You say, I'm going to go take a walk now. I'm creating this boundary. I'm going to create a space where I can breathe and move and think, and thoughts can flow through me. And I think that also is like just so important, that activeness, like being active, that agency, absolutely, in my own healing, in my own mending, in my own just like wellness as a human. I mean, that term gets overused, but like, how can I stay active in that? How can I make that space? And yeah, I think the older I get, the more I realize that's on me.
Yes.
That is totally on me to walk out the door, right? And like go create that space where I can recenter or whatever it is, needing more space. Just maybe it's just like taking the weight off of it too, right? You have a little bit perspective or something, but that is 100% on me. And I think that's something that I realized with walking. I've always kind of been a walker, but it wasn't until I had young kids that I committed to walking.
Yes.
And then during the pandemic, how that changed and what that did in the pandemic. We had a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old who were suddenly at home, and it was 40 minutes. It was like a 20-minute mile that way and back. And it was 40 minutes of just calm, quiet, spaciousness, where everything was okay. It's one step in front of the other, right? Just like that's all I had to do. Sometimes I'd call my mom, sometimes I'd walk in silence, but it was like that space. And I think so much of creativity is just about that.
Exactly.
Like it's about just making that space. It's just those 40 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like you're my best friend in the world right now. I feel like
yay, let's be best friends.
So I may just show up someday and we're going to go for a walk. I thank you so much.
Amazing.
I can't tell you how inspiring your books have been, how I loved your class. Everybody sign up for our next class. It's really transformative, beautiful, meaningful, important. So thank you for writing your books. Thank you for showing us how mending can be a beautiful, artful, important act in creating a beautiful life, to be perfectly honest. And so tell
Thank you.
everybody where they can find you. How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate your receiving of the
Mm.
work in the way that you have. So thank you. I have a website. It's my full name. You have to be able to spell it to get there, but there's that, katrinarodabaugh.com. And also, I do still use Instagram. And in the last couple of years, I've really turned towards my newsletter. I call it my love letter, like as this space. I try to write every other week, sometimes more, sometimes less, to try to just pull it all together. My offerings, what I'm thinking about, my walks, the plants, the mending, the design. Um, so I always love when folks join me there too.
Yeah, please sign up for our beautiful love letter. It's one of those things that arrives in our inboxes and is a real joy to open up. So thank you.
Mm,
I hope you have a
thank you.
wonderful walk today, and I am so grateful you said yes. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great
Thank you
day.
for having me. The
Okay.
pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
This Morning Walk is a production of Blind Nil Audio, hosted by me, Alex L.
And me, Libby Delana. Produced and edited by Chris Jacobs.
If you find value and meaning in the conversations that Libby and I have, please share the show with a friend and consider leaving a 5-star review. Comments on Apple Podcasts really help us out. When you do that, it introduces this show to a bigger audience. Thank you so much for listening.
You are wonderful. Have a great walk.
The views, information, or opinions expressed in this series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Chip and Joanna Gaines, Blind Nil Audio, nor Magnolia.